Hey there, buddy. Good morning. Do you want to go to Springfield with me and go visit Abraham Lincoln's grave? All right, let's do it. Well, good day, my friends. Today we are in Springfield, Illinois, and we are at Oak Ridge Cemetery, where President Abraham Lincoln and his family are buried here in Lincoln's tomb. And I'm going to tell you today all of the crazy things and bizarre occurrences that have happened to this tomb since he has been out here. Daze with Jordan the Lion and you all. It begins right now. When President Lincoln was untimely assassinated, Mary Todd Lincoln was absolutely distraught. She had already in her life lost two of her children, and now she lost her husband. She was absolutely beside herself and went into seclusion in the White House for several weeks. So there was never a plan of where President Lincoln would be buried. So she originally was thinking, at the time, she didn't really even have a plan, but she was approached by Illinois saying, this is your home. You live in Springfield. This was his home. We'd like to bury him here. She was kind of against that at first, but it was her oldest son, Robert Todd Lincoln, who convinced her to allow him to be buried in Springfield. Now, at the time, this cemetery had been dedicated in 1860, just half a decade before the president's passing, and he and Mrs. Lincoln were out here for the dedication, and he had made a comment that he'd like to have his eternal resting place in a quiet place like this. So without asking her, she did sanction a committee to help come up with ideas, but they appropriated a spot of land in downtown Springfield and started building a mausoleum there. And when she found out, she hit the roof and said, absolutely not. Oak Ridge is the only place that I will allow him to be buried. And if you don't follow my instructions, I will have him buried where George Washington was supposed to be buried, under the Capitol Rotunda. So they had to abide by her wishes. In general, you would think that you would want to abide by the widow's wishes, but I think Springfield's thought at the time was that if they buried him in the center of town, it would be easier for people to come visit him because this was out in the country at the time, and it would help bring business to the city. But she didn't care about that. She wanted him to be buried here. So initially, President Lincoln was brought here. This was the Oak Ridge Cemetery receiving vault, and they do have a plaque on there noting that he was here. And the reason he was here is because the committee that was formed was coming up with an idea of how they wanted to do a monument. So they had him here, and they actually brought their child Willie's remains here as well. And also little Eddie. If you don't know the story, Abraham Lincoln lost a child in 1850. That was little Eddie, and he passed away very young. He had health problems his whole life and passed away very young. So they had buried him at a cemetery outside of town that is now actually where the high school is. So they moved him here, and all three, President Lincoln, Willie, and Eddie, were all here for about 6 months. It says from May 4th, 1865 to December 21st, 1865. And that was while they were building a temporary mausoleum that they would then be housed in or sheltered in until they came up with the final, which is where they all are today. But initially they would have been, as you can see, this was pretty much a few years after they had Lincoln here, they closed it. But what it was it was a temporary vault for people that were going to be buried here and didn't have a plot ready yet at the time. You could come visit, family members could come visit them here. So it would have been in there somewhere, that wall. Get you the best view we can. And then they were moved to the temporary vault, so we will go up to where the temporary vault, and if you want to read more to the story when you come out here, they do have the story over here on this plaque, first resting place of Abraham Lincoln. And they would have had, as you can see in the pictures initially, they had military guards out here. Actually, upon reading this, it's saying that at the time, it was only Willie and Abraham here. It was when they were moved 6 months into the next location, which was the temporary tomb, that's when they brought Eddie's remains here. So if you look up here, you can see where the monument now is, but right over here, there's a little stone. I'm not even sure if we're allowed to go over to it, but I will show you the best way I can. That is where the temporary mausoleum was. There, that's about as close as I can get because they have rails and everything here. But right there, that blank stone is there to note that that's where the temporary sarcophagus and everything were in the holding pattern. Now, they were there years because once they got this built, then they raised money for the giant one back here. And it was a crazy story of all the things that happened. But originally, like I told you, it was Abraham, Willie, and we know Eddie was here. But then within 2 years of them working on the main, what will be the main crypt, the tomb, unfortunately Tad ended up dying, and so Tad was the first person to be entombed over here. So we'll go around to the front. So in 1871, after a trip to Europe with his mother, Mary Todd Lincoln, Tad came back and inexplicably died. So that's why they decided he would be the first one to be buried here. So they entombed him here and then had a sarcophagus made for Abraham that when they brought it in, it wasn't big enough for his casket. So they ended up taking him out of his elaborate casket that was made for him, like this beautiful sterling silver trimmed casket, and took him completely out of it, put him in a different one, and then put him inside the sarcophagus, as well as Willie, Eddie, and Tad. So because, you know, they had all been moved in there, the Lincoln Monument Association, who basically was in charge of all this and owned it, they just decided, hey, this thing's been in the making for like 10 years. We may not be alive to see it finished. It was pretty much finished by 1874, but they didn't have the statues from the 4 arms of the military during the Civil War that they wanted to put up there. So they decided to do a dedication anyway without the statues, and had President Grant out here, Custer, they had General Sherman, and dedicated the whole place. And then 2 years later, 3 men tried to grave rob Abraham Lincoln's body. So apparently at the time there were men who made their living in counterfeit, and their head ringmaster had been locked up. And so their plan to get him out was they were going to kidnap Lincoln's body here and demand him be released and get a $250,000 ransom. They thought they would get away with it because at the time there was no security out here and there was just a padlock on the front door. However, one of the men, one of the 3, was actually an informant for the FBI. And as soon as they told him what they wanted to do, he alerted the FBI, and they had a sting operation here. So the night that the men came, so they actually had Pinkerton security guards hidden out here in the night, and then they had Secret Service inside the building along with the custodian. The custodian's house was right here, so there was always somebody close by. So the men broke through the chains, went back to the back where Lincoln was buried, where the sarcophagus was, and then apparently a shot rang out. And what they found out later, it was one of the Pinkerton guards accidentally let off a shot. The Secret Service didn't know who it was, so chaos ensued. The men got away. They were eventually caught about a week and a half later and given a year in prison each. But because of that, people were very speculative that this was safe enough for Lincoln's body, and they wanted to know after that happened where he was, because the men were close enough. They were able to remove the front and the lid and had pulled his 500-pound casket out before they ran off. So one of the members of the Lincoln Monument Association went to the newspapers and told them, hey, this is what we did. We dug a hole 10 feet down in the floor. We lowered President Lincoln's casket down there, poured cement in, put the tile back on the floor, and that's where he's at. But that was actually a lie. What they really had done was they had several unused rooms inside this building. They just took his casket, apparently, put it in one of those rooms and covered it with construction materials for working on the place. And that's where he continued to be for 14 years until the late 1890s, when they did a surveying of the property and found out that it was poorly built. After all the money they put in, all the time, it was poorly built, and that the monument was actually sinking because the foundation was only 6 foot deep. So they had to do a whole thing where they actually removed all of the remains that were in here. And by that time, Mary Todd Lincoln had passed. Robert Todd Lincoln's son, only son, Abraham Lincoln, he had passed, so he was buried in here. So there were actually 6 bodies that they removed, and they created a temporary, basically, mausoleum in the ground, and that's where they put all of them and put giant sheetrock over it so nobody could disturb it until they got the renovations done here. So when the renovations were finally done in 1901, they had another big ceremony, and they had cranes that actually, I don't know if they were in the front or the back, I couldn't tell from the photos. They basically craned each one out. They were all in a plywood casing. So they brought all of them out, opened them up, and then took the caskets in and put them in their final resting place, including Abraham Lincoln. They put him back in the sarcophagus that had been opened before. But a week later, Robert Todd Lincoln came, and he was not happy. He wasn't happy because he thought that there was absolutely no security. All there was an alarm that went over to the custodian's house, and he didn't feel secure in that. So he told them he wanted them to do what Conklin had actually said happened in the papers 25 years before. He wanted them to dig a hole in the floor, put his father's casket down there, and he wanted them to pour cement in, and that's exactly what they did. However, something interesting happened before that. So before they ended up doing that, 20 of the members of the association actually came in here, and before they lowered Abraham Lincoln's casket down, they took the lid off. And this was documented in Life magazine. The last living survivor that was here for that was one of the children of those men, and said he was called at school and told to come out here. And he came, and he went inside with his father and the 20 other men, and said that they took the lid off and saw Abraham Lincoln with kind of a chalky mold on his face, but everything else looked pretty similar. And they just wanted to, apparently in the article he said they wanted to verify in case anybody ever had doubts in the future that it was in fact him, and just a curiosity, So they did seal him back up and lowered him in and poured the concrete in, and that's where he should have remained undisturbed. However, we had another issue 30 years later. So if you're wondering why are we not inside looking around, it's because in 1931 this place stunk to high heaven, water had leaked in, and it was looking really shabby, so they decided to again do another restoration where they removed all of the remains of all of the family members, put them secretly in a different mausoleum except for Lincoln, because of course he was in concrete, so he stayed there while they did all the restoration. They even made the monolith even bigger, so now they made the actual area where the family is much bigger. You can get closer to it, and that's why I'm going to show you now what it looks like, because everything that we would see now was not what it looked like before 1931. This is open pretty much every day to the public for free, 9 a.m. to 5, and you can see all the beautiful artwork. This whole thing actually was, when they decided to build it, they did an open contest. So an American was selected to, his design was selected. There he is holding the Emancipation Proclamation. When they unveiled it the very first time, 1874, that was the only statue up there. Wow. Here they have different times in his life, and the larger size of these statues are various places. I believe this is the soldier statue. That's when he would practice law on horseback. So somewhere in one of these walls, in one of those rooms, is where he would have been all that 14 years. Now in 31, when they opened this back up to the public, the white sarcophagus that he was in was actually moved outside, and they replaced it with a different one. Here we go. Here are the family members, including his wife. And then the president's new sarcophagus since 1931 is right there. Now the flags all represent states that the Lincoln family has lived in since they came to America. Now, he's not actually right below this. He's actually a little further back. They said, from what I read, he's 6 feet from the north wall, and he's actually, the same way the sarcophagus is, he's laying that way. Can you imagine all the craziness that ensued? So when he passed, Mary Todd Lincoln basically just lost it. They say she died that day herself. She ended up thinking that she was cursed and that she would end up spending a bunch of money trying to find people that could give her some explanation. She thought she was surrounded by ghosts, so she was paying, charlatans lots of Abraham's money or her inheritance towards them. So Robert Todd Lincoln actually had her committed for 4 years to save her from spending all the money, or 4 months actually. But after Abraham died, Tad went with her everywhere. Apparently he had some learning disabilities and wasn't able to read or really learn. So when she moved to Europe, for several years after Abraham died, she took him with her, and he lived with her till he died. So here's Eddie, who I said was the first one to pass. Edward Baker Lincoln. He, I believe, was the second child. And then Willie was the third. And he passed away while Abraham was in office also. Eddie passed away while Abraham was in Congress or legislature, I believe. He was back and forth to Washington, so he was living in Washington, but Eddie was always sick there, so the family was actually living in Springfield during that time mostly. But then Willie passed, and when Willie passed away, apparently Tad became obsessed with Abraham and just would not leave his side. He was also the holy terror inside the White House. He was the one that would bring the goat inside and disrupt meetings and everything, but Tad was joined at the hip with his father. The only family member actually photographed with Abraham Lincoln was Tad. So Tad died at 18, and like I mentioned, at one time, Abraham Lincoln, which was Robert Todd Lincoln's son, was here. But when Robert Todd Lincoln died, he didn't want to be buried here, even though they have a section for them. He didn't want to be buried here. He's buried in Arlington Cemetery. He had a great career. He was on Ulysses S. Grant's staff during the Civil War and was there when Robert E. Lee surrendered. He ended up being a diplomat and held a lot of positions. So his son Abraham was moved over to where he is buried after Robert Todd Lincoln passed. So other than that, the Lincoln family is all here, and Abraham is somewhere back there under the ground. I think he'd be happy with this, you know. I don't know how you couldn't be. This is quite an honor, and it's just unfortunate he's had to be moved so many freaking times. Here's part of the sarcophagus that used to have his remains in it. From what I read, they put it outside and people were just picking it apart for like souvenirs, so I think somebody eventually stole it. I'm not sure. But if you want to see Eddie's original headstone from the other cemetery, that is located in Abraham Lincoln's Presidential Library. Pretty nice tomb. The statue up top, this is the Gettysburg Address, but the statue when we were first out front that's up top of Abraham Lincoln, that's him holding the Emancipation Proclamation. I've been here before, but I didn't know a lot of the stories about the grave robbing and the history of the tomb when I was here before, so I was recently reading about it and it was just so fascinating. Because most of the other presidents, especially the older ones, chose to be buried at their homes. Washington, Jefferson, all those people, so. They said, I read that after he passed away, Mary Todd Lincoln was not liked in Springfield and wouldn't come outside, just had her windows drawn, and the kids in the neighborhood would come and taunt her and call her like the crazy lady of the neighborhood. So that's partially why she ended up moving to Europe. That and Abraham Lincoln's last law partner wrote a book. He went and interviewed a bunch of people from Lincoln's history, and he believed that Mary Todd Lincoln was not Abraham Lincoln's love, that was not the love of his life, and he published that book while she was alive, and she was furious. And then this is from Lincoln's second inauguration. Back out to the main rotunda. Very cool. That was quite an experience. Now knowing more, it's even more fun. Now I did forget to mention this. I tried not to show this because this statue did not come here until 1931 when they did that last restoration. That's when he came here, and people always rub the nose for good luck. That's part of tradition, and it looks like they're rubbing that for luck as well. But I asked somebody inside whether we were allowed to walk over to that stone that I showed you, and he said we sure can. He said the rails are just there for safety if you want to use them, but we can. And also he was able to clear up to me. He said actually it wasn't the front section up here where they put all of their remains while they were working on it in 1901. It was actually back here because the Navy statue is back here, and he said you can see the Navy statue in some of the photos. So I'll try and find those photos to share with you. Oh, I think this is the doorway. I saw the photos of them removing some of the remains. So that means that they were actually right out here. So this was it. Right out here, they had, this was all dug up. It was, I think they said 10 feet down, and they put all 6 of, it would have been Abraham Lincoln, Mary Todd, Willie, Eddie, Tad, and Abraham Lincoln, the namesake, which was Robert Todd Lincoln's son. So 6 of them were all lowered into a temporary mausoleum underground. They just put big stones, and I'll show you the photo. But that's very interesting to see. And then right behind us, you can see that stone down there that we're going to walk to, I was telling you about. But this actually shows a photo of what that mausoleum, that temporary mausoleum, looked like while it was there. They just didn't want anybody else to ever use it after Lincoln and his sons had been there. So they had originally had a monument there, it says, but it was removed at some point, so they just replaced it with that one down there. So we might as well walk down to it. It was right there on the hillside. And there's just nothing written on it or anything, but right there within eye shot of where his future permanent home would be. And as I was walking down, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. If you look at this back door, on the other side is exactly below is where Lincoln would be. Too bad we're not allowed to climb the stairs and look at the statues. Like I said, those all depict the arms of the Civil War military. And as I understand, they were Confederate cannons that were melted down to make those. Robert Keller, thank you for becoming my newest Patreon. Well, my friends, we're gonna call it a day. I'm definitely gonna come back up here because I'd like to do another video on someone else that's up here related to this story. And I'm gonna save it for the future. Hope you guys enjoyed this. If you ever get through Springfield, this is a must stop. It's free, it's open all day. It's an amazing part of history. Thank you all for watching. See you next time. Have a great night and goodbye.